All right, welcome everyone today to today's webinar. It's on Coalitions One-on-One. We really hope that you get some relevant information out today. I guess I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Heidi Bainbridge. Heidi is our Director of Education and Training.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Like Nick said, I am the Director of Education and Training for Epiphany Community Services. And this is a fairly new role for Epiphany, and they brought me on to help develop some training offerings specifically for their clients. And so we are really working on a lot of exciting stuff here at Epiphany to provide our clients not only with stellar evaluation services, but we want to be able to provide coalitions with the training that they need as well in different areas of their coalition work. And so one of the things that we're working on doing is developing a curriculum of trainings that we can roll out to our clients. And this is one that we have had some requests for specifically from clients. They're looking for ways to orient their new members to the world of coalitions. They may have members who really aren't familiar with what a coalition does, what a coalition's about, or they may have some members who have been long-standing coalition members who have been a part of an organization like this for many years, and the landscape of coalitions has really changed over the course of the last 20 years. And what used to be where coalitions did a lot of programs and went into schools and provided education and did different mock accidents and different events for their coalition work, it's really changed away from that. And so coalitions are looking for a way to orient their members to understand what the landscape of coalitions really looks like now. And so we developed this specifically for a client who was looking for something, and so we thought this would be a great way to start out our training series with all of our clients. And so this is something that would be available to any of you to use during a coalition meeting. You could have the web link, and anytime you have a new member join, you could share that with them and have them watch it so that they're familiar with what a coalition really is about. And it's something that we want you to be able to use, a tool to have in your toolbox so that you can make sure that everyone in your organization is on the same page around what a coalition really is and what they as members are expected to do. So with that little intro, we will go ahead and get started. So basically, when we talk about a coalition, we want to talk about what is the definition. And so this is something that we share in a lot of our trainings, and you've maybe seen this definition before in different areas. I know it's in a lot of different publications. But the thing that we like to really point out about this is that coalition is a verb. It is an action word. It is something that is happening, and so that's really important for us to notice. And so I want you guys to just take a second here and read through that as I read it aloud to you, and then we're going to kind of dissect it a little bit. So a coalition, it is a voluntary strategic alliance to enhance our ability to achieve a common purpose by sharing risks, responsibilities, resources, and rewards. And so if we want to dissect that just a little bit, we talked already about the fact that it's a verb. And the next thing that I think is important for us to note is that it's a process of steps. It's not just one thing, but it's really a process. We go through what we call a strategic prevention framework, which we'll get to in a minute, but it's moving that community forward through a known process that everyone follows and a routine that everyone follows and everyone knows. And the other thing that's really important about this is that it's about not just having people around the table that makes them a coalition, but it's what they do. And so that's the big thing that we really like to remind our coalition members is that they're not there just to be members around the table or a number on a list or a sector that's filled, but they're there to do things. And so we will be talking about a little bit later in the presentation what a staff person's role is as opposed to what a coalition member's role is. And that will become really more evident, that points out, that it's really about what they do around the table for the coalition. And so in simple terms, a coalition is a group of people working together to make a positive change in their community. Most of the coalitions that are probably on the line today and that are many of our clients are typically working to make positive changes around substance abuse. But it doesn't have to be. It can also be around wellness initiatives. It can be around violence initiatives. It can be around anything that you want to make sure that you are making a positive change related to. So coalitions can be formed for any reason and any purpose. So when we typically think about what the coalition's role is, there are usually 3 types of coalitions, and we're going to get into each one of these in more detail. We have service-related coalitions, we have coordination coalitions, and we have community mobilization coalitions. And I kind of want you to just think before we get, or as we go through each one of these, where does your coalition fall? And after we get through all 3, I may ask you, where do you feel that your coalition falls? And just ask you to type that into the chat box, as we go through. If one is really resonating with you, say, oh yeah, that's me, and just type it into the chat box so I can kind of get a sense for what you feel like your coalition's role is. So a service coalition, a coalition whose main role is service, is that they provide services to individuals in the community. They may provide them on new information. They may share resources and tools and information about specific topics, new drug trends. They may share about events that are going on, but they're providing information to individuals or groups. They might also be building skills of individuals or groups. So they may be providing trainings to teaching staff. They may be providing trainings to law enforcement. They may be providing trainings to merchants who sell alcohol, or trainings to people who are looking to identify drug-impaired students. But providing skills or tools to a group of individuals is another type of service. And then the last service is products that they may provide to individuals or groups that affect a desired behavior. Sometimes those might be ID scanners, for example. If you're looking to make sure that people are checking IDs, they may provide that product to the individuals. They may provide alcohol testing kits to school districts if they're wanting kids to remain alcohol or drug-free. Those are products that they would provide to a group or an individual to have an impact on that desired behavior. And one of the notes that we wanted to make sure that we made here is services don't include things like scare tactic activities or any programs that are not proven effective in substance abuse prevention work. So if it's not something that has been, on a evidence-based list somewhere, either through SAMHSA or other organizations or entities you may have funders with, those would not typically be, we wouldn't necessarily consider those services because they're not proven to be effective in the work that we're doing. These are really things that are effective trainings, effective programs, information, or products that can be used to really change the behavior that's occurring in the community. So that's a service-based coalition. The next type of coalition that we see are coordination coalitions. And these are really those coalitions that bring everyone together. They bring all the people to the table to talk about all the things that are going on and make sure that everyone knows what everyone else is doing. If someone's having an issue, with drug abuse, they bring the treatment people to the table to be able to coordinate those efforts. And so they are the ones who, first of all, ensure that we're using our resources effectively. Some of you may come from smaller communities who don't have a lot of money. I know personally the community I come from has very limited resources, and so our community is always looking to make the best use of the resources available. And so a coalition is a way to help coordinate those resources, share those things, and if the school district has a grant to provide substance abuse education, we don't want our coalition to provide substance abuse education because the school's already doing it. So we just partner with the school, allow them to do the education, and we maybe provide some additional supports that they might need. And so it's effective use of the resources we have. This type of coalition also provides a consistent message across all the systems and organizations that the coalition or the Substance Abuse Prevention Agency is sending the same message as the Boy Scouts and the same message as our Child Abuse Prevention Council. They all are saying the same thing in regards to the issues that our community is dealing with. So their job is to bring all those people together, make sure we're all using language, having the same message when it comes to whatever the problem may be in our community, whether that's alcohol use, whether that's marijuana use, or whether that's tobacco use, or even some of those other topics that we spoke about, wellness, obesity, domestic violence, whatever it is that's the problem in your community, ensuring that there's a consistent message across all the organizations. And then finally, providing that complementary services to the broader population. So again, back to if the school is providing substance abuse education, we don't want to provide the same thing. We want to provide something that complements that. If law enforcement's doing compliance checks, we don't want to do compliance checks, but we may offer a training to ensure that merchants know what to do when compliance checks occur. And so providing that service that is complementary to what is already occurring with other organizations and systems in our community. So we've gone through two types of coalitions. Number one, the service type of coalition. Number two, the coordination type of service. And the final one is the community mobilization type. So community mobilization coalitions, they're designed to really put the feet on the ground to make the change. They're the ones that are going out and working with policymakers to make changes in policies. They're working with lawmakers to make changes in local ordinances or state laws. They're the ones who are doing the research to determine why it's important that we raise the tax on alcohol, or why it's important that we put some laws in place in regards to where dispensaries can be located in our communities. That's what we see a community mobilization coalition doing. They make sure that their voice and perspective is heard on these issues. If it's up for vote to make marijuana medicinal in their state, they're the ones who are going to have a voice and a perspective on this issue, whether it's at their state house, with their local representatives in their local community, about the facts and information regarding the issue that may be coming about in their community. Maybe it's a heroin issue. Maybe we need to look at marijuana. Maybe marijuana is on the rise. Whatever the issue may be, this organization or this mobilization community coalition is about making sure that they have a voice and a perspective that is heard and seen and felt throughout the community. And they're also the ones who do problem analysis and take action the analysis that they do. They do a great job of gathering the data to determine what the problem actually is, as opposed to they hear a lot on the news that there's a heroin epidemic, and so now all of a sudden our community has a heroin epidemic, when it may not. So it's really important that the Community Mobilization Coalition is the one who's doing analysis to determine, do we have that kind of problem here? Is this something we should be looking at, or does our focus need to be somewhere else? And then what action do we take to make sure that we are addressing the specific local community problems that we've identified? And so that's a Community Mobilization Coalition. So I want you to take just a second and think about those three types: the Community Mobilization, the Coordination Coalition, and the Service Providing Coalition. And honestly, tell me, which one do you think, where do you think you fit in those three with your coalition? And go ahead and type it there in the chat box, and send it to everyone so that we can see it in the chat box. I'm going to give you just a second to put those in there. Again, the options here, I'm going to take it back here so you can see all three together: either a service coalition, a coordination coalition, or a community mobilization coalition. I see Connie says she's community mobilization. That's great. Tracy says a little of services and coordination. Great. Claudia is telling me coordination. Excellent. So these are great. I'm excited to hear from you guys. And so the thing that I want to point out to you is it's okay to be any or all of them. We would really like to see you encompassing a little bit of all three. Community mobilization is the one that is the most important when it comes to community coalitions, because it is what's going to sustain the work of the coalition. But we like to see coalitions who have a little bit of all three, that they may be providing a few services here and there, they may be doing a lot of coordination with the different entities and organizations, but they're also going out and being the voice and the mobilizers for the issues that are at hand in their community. And so we like to see coalitions that are well-rounded and have a little bit of all three. So if you feel you may be lacking in one of those areas, it might be something to take a look into, and it may be an area where you want to think about additional training, education, some things that we can assist with from our end to move you into, ensuring that you are doing all three of those pieces of coalitions. And so how we go through that process is by using the Strategic Prevention Framework. Probably all of you who are on the phone are very familiar with the Strategic Prevention Framework. And again, the purpose of this training is really to orient a new person to what is a coalition, how do they operate. And so we want to make sure they understand the process that a coalition uses to determine what they're going to do, basically. And so the Strategic Prevention Framework is the process by which coalitions most often operate. There are some different processes out there. We have found this one to be the most effective and the model that most funders are following as they are asking organizations to develop plans. They are using this model. And so we're going to go through each of the different bubbles or circles that are a part of this process. The different components are assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, evaluation, cultural competency, and sustainability. And those are in no specific, they're kind of in a specific order, but they don't necessarily always go in a specific order. We encourage you to start with assessment because it's important that we get a good framework and groundwork for what we're going to do. And so during the assessment process, we really think about doing a community assessment, gathering data, finding out what resources we currently have in our community, what resources we may be lacking in our community, and a little bit about what's happened before us to give us a little bit of history on the issues that we may be dealing with. And so it's important that we do a good, thorough community assessment before we start. We may come back and do an assessment again a little bit later, and we may do an assessment during implementation, and we may do an assessment after evaluation, and we may come back at, after 5 years of work and do a new assessment. And so assessments are happening ongoing, but we really encourage you to start any good strategic plan with an assessment process. The next piece is then building that capacity and determining who needs to be at the table to help with the work that we're doing. Who has a vested interest in the problem that we've identified? Who can be a voice and a public speaker for what we're working on? Who has skills and knowledge and ability to make a change in the problems that we're addressing? And so we really have to make sure that we have the right people around the table who are those doers and those people who can take action on the problems that we identify during our assessment process. The next piece is then doing the planning. And so it's important to go through a strategic planning process. There are a variety of different models that are out there that can be utilized. I think probably one of the most popular ones that most coalitions use, and I believe that the Coalition Academy that Drug-Free Communities coalitions go through, the most popular one they use is the but why here bubble logic model or strategic planning process. And so you have to go through that process to get all of those ideas out there, to have coalition members given an opportunity to think through what's happening in our community, why is it happening, and what does that really look like locally in our community. And what comes out of that planning process is a logic model. And I'm going to bump over here to our next slide so that we can talk about the different products that are developed through each of these pieces. And so this is during the planning where you develop your logic model. And it's that visual representation of what your problem analysis ends up with. And so this is a pretty detailed process, and we've done some personal one-on-one problem analysis trainings with coalitions who need some facilitated guidance through this process to work with their coalition members to find out what are the problems in their communities, and really digging into those local conditions and what do they look like specifically in our community as compared to a community in Ohio. And so we have to, really dive in and get really specific and really local, because every single strategy that we develop through this planning process is driven by that logic model. And so it's important that we are really specific when we're developing those. And finally, the last piece that we develop out of the planning process is our action plan. So once we've said, okay, this is what our local conditions look like, we need to develop a plan for action for how we're going to address those. And that plan usually details who's going to do the action, what are they going to do, by when are they going to do it, and then do they need any additional resources? Do they need any help with that process? And so that plan is developed with the coalition members. They volunteer for the different action items based on their interests, their skills, their knowledge, and their abilities, and they are the ones that have that vested interest in that plan and in making sure that those actions happen. After you've done the planning, which this is the part that everyone loves, and it's actually not on this sheet because there's no product, but it's the implementation, and that's the going out and the doing. That's the thing that most people come to your table for. That's what they want to do, is that implement. Go out and do the work. And so sometimes we struggle with coalitions to keep people engaged through the assessment, the planning, or the assessment, the capacity, and the planning, because they really just want to go and implement. And so it's important that they understand why we need to do those first 3 steps before we implement, so that we are implementing strategies that are going to have an impact on the problems that we're trying to address. And so implementation is just that, going out and doing what we said we would do on our action plan. Once we have implemented, then it's time to evaluate. And so we have to determine if what we did made a difference, if it worked, if it didn't work, how we can adjust. And evaluation plan, which is the product that we produce, will help you determine that. It will help you be able to align each of the strategies with data to determine if you have met your outcomes. And that's something that ECS does a really great job of helping clients out with. They help you develop and work through an action plan, and then they, with their systems and their staff, help provide you with the tools to determine if the work that you have done has made an impact. And so that's a really great reason to use an evaluator, and I know that ECS does a great job at this. And then the next piece, cultural competency, which is the next piece of the framework, is really, we need to be thinking about that through all of these phases. And that's why when you look at the floral, bubbly diagram, it's in the middle. Because as we're doing assessment, we need to make sure we're being culturally competent. As we're building that capacity, we need to make sure we are taking into account all of the cultural differences in our communities, whether that be race, religion, economic income, education level, any of those different cultures that may make up our community, that they are all represented as a part of building that capacity, as a part of planning for our strategies, so that everyone is being included in the implementation of the plan that's being put forth, that everyone is being included as a part of evaluating the process. And so cultural competence is not something that happens, you know, fifth in line. It is something that, or sixth in line, it's something that we're doing all the time throughout the entire process, and we have to be mindful of that from day one when we begin. And sustainability is the same way. As you're doing an assessment and as you're starting to plan, you need to be thinking about how will we keep this going long term, and we need to be mindful of thinking about what it is that's going to make this sustainable, and what pieces we need to be putting in place to ensure sustainability. And so that's also where our sustainability plan comes in, and that's another product that a coalition should have to detail how they're going to sustain things when funding may run out. If you're completely 100% funded by a DFC grant, you need to be able to say how you're going to sustain staff and strategies beyond those funds. And so developing that plan will help with that process. As we move forward, the next thing that we really want to make sure that you guys are familiar with is the 7 strategies for behavior change. And these are the 7 strategies that coalitions typically use when implementing their action plan. Once they have determined those specific local conditions, they're going to decide what actions to take, and they typically fall into one of these 7 categories. We encourage people to have things in all 7 categories. We encourage people to have more things in the bottom 4 categories, because those are considered our environmental change strategies, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But we like to see, for each local condition, some activities or some action items that fall into each of the categories. So how can we modify policies around a specific local condition? How can we provide information around this specific local condition? We want to make sure that we include all of these. And so I'm going to talk specifically about the environmental strategies because they are the most important. And so these are the ones that are really aimed at changing or influencing the community conditions, the standards, the institutions, the structures, the systems, and the policies that shape behaviors. So it's changing things that are grounded in place, that will be there beyond the life of our funds, that once implemented, we don't have to do a lot to sustain them. Maybe a little bit of follow-up to see how things are going, but they're really self-sustaining efforts. And so it's really about changing, you know, the framework of the community. And the great thing about these environmental strategies is they do reach your entire population. If you're looking at a business policy, it impacts every person that works at that business. If you're looking at a countywide ordinance, it impacts every person that lives in that county, as well as the overall environment around it. If you're impacting the way every person in that county, it's going to impact the way the environment looks. It's going to impact the way people think about a specific situation. So if we're talking about the Tobacco Smoke-Free Air Act is a great example. If we say that people cannot smoke indoors, that impacts the entire environment of our state because you no longer see smoking occurring indoors. It impacts every person that lives in that state. It impacts the environment of the state. And so it has an impact overall. The other great thing about environmental strategies is they're lasting. We talked about that. And over time, it begins to shift the community norms. Smoking on an airplane used to be very normal. People did that all the time. Can you imagine stepping on an airplane today and seeing someone smoking a cigarette? It's just, that is no longer the norm. And so when you make those changes to the environment with environmental strategy changes, you're really changing things that are going to change the way people think and feel and view different situations. They also produce pretty quick wins. Communities get behind some of these types of changes because they see that change. They see the difference. They see things happening. They see things being implemented, and they want to get behind and support those types of organizations and those types of groups that are making those types of changes. And then it also instills commitment towards impact that's long-term. People want to continue to ride the train if they see that it's making a difference in their community. They want to stay on board if they're seeing success, if they're seeing things change for the better. And so then people are committed longer term as opposed to people that just hop in and out when they don't see anything happening, they don't really feel a part of something. And so those environmental strategies can help with some of that commitment towards the long-term stuff. So here's a few examples of some environmental strategies, and I'm not going to go over these individually. We just like to share them with organizations who are interested in, what does an environmental strategy really look like? I spoke a little bit about the clean air laws. Some of you are probably familiar with responsible beverage server training and doing compliance checks. Making changes to advertising in your community. Maybe you have a big rodeo in your community and it's sponsored by the tobacco industry. Working to get that advertising limited, only in certain areas, not as much. Work with some non-tobacco retailers to provide some advertising for the event as well. All of those types of things are considered environmental strategies. And so these are the types of things that a community mobilization coalition should be doing in order to make those long-standing changes in their community around the problem that they're attempting to address. So the other thing that's important for us to talk about as a part of a coalition are the roles. The roles within a coalition. We've got staff, we have executive members, we may have youth, and then we have general coalition members. What are those roles? And I think I'm going to define a couple of them here today, but it's important as a coalition that we define all of those roles within our coalition as a part of our capacity building efforts so that everyone knows what their role is and how they can make a difference as a part of the organization. And so it's important that, A, we have enough feet on the ground to make the change, that our services are being provided and coordinated, and that our community has a voice in addressing the issues. That sounds really familiar to the 3 types of coalitions, doesn't it? So it's important that we are making sure that we have all of these things covered in order to fulfill all 3 of those types of coalitions. So again, coalition members, they have a role. Their role, and this is really important as leaders of the coalition, either executive members or staff of the coalition, that we make sure our coalition members know that their role is to lead the coalition. They are the ones that make the decisions. They are the ones that take the action. They are the ones that implement the action plan. They seek change within their spheres of influence that they have connections with. They recruit other people to the organization. That's the coalition members' job. That is their role. That is what they are expected to do as a part of the coalition. And they sign an MOU that details those expectations and agreements. The staff facilitates the process. They check in with the coalition members to make sure they took the action, to see if they have any questions about who or how to get a hold of someone. Do they need any resources? They really facilitate the process. They make sure that the meeting minutes or agendas are ready. They maybe send out reminders. They facilitate. They do not act. They remove the barriers to action. They make sure that everyone has what they need in order to get the action done. They assist with the planning process because typically they are the ones that are most familiar with the process, but they don't do it themselves. It's a process that's worked through with the members of the coalition. And then finally, they assist with the implementation, but they don't implement. They make sure that everyone knows what their job is. They make sure that things are being done. They follow up with people who say, yep, I'll take care of that by Tuesday. Check in on Tuesday. Did they get it taken care of? If not, how can you assist? How can you make it easier for them to get it done by the next date? And so many times I think coalition members feel that these tasks are what the staff should be doing, when in reality this is their job. And so it's important that we emphasize that with our coalition so they are aware of that, so that they know what their role is, and that this is their coalition. Staff is only there to help facilitate and assist. That is their job. And to make sure that some of the grant requirements and paperwork is taken care of. And so that may be a mind shift for some coalitions, and that's a process that we can help work through as well. In this training, the next slide here is actually an opportunity for a coalition, if you were presenting this to your membership, where you would share your coalition org chart so that this new member was familiar with what the organization hierarchy looked like, who your fiscal agent is, who your executive members are, where the executive membership falls, if you have any standing committees, who your staff members are, and you can walk through that as an orientation process with that new member in this space, in this presentation. So there's not really a lot here that I have to share other than it's important that your membership know what your org chart looks like so they are comfortable with not only what the hierarchy looks like, but also how the decision-making process works. Where do they fit in, and how do they get to be a part of making those decisions? And so this org chart is important for that conversation. And then the final piece is a part of the orientation process is, again, this is modifiable for each specific coalition. You get to choose the next steps based on how you're using this presentation. And so you may want to engage them in membership. You may have forms to have them fill out. You may have an orientation manual you give them. You may have a video you have them watch. Whatever it is, you are going to want to talk about how you're going to engage them in membership. And maybe they're already there, and so you don't even need that. Maybe you want to talk about different volunteer opportunities that are coming up that they may be able to engage in. Maybe you have a work group that's working on different projects that they may want to join one of those. Or whatever else it may be for your specific coalition and your needs of your membership. Again, this is the really modifiable part about this particular presentation, is when you're using it in an orientation step or orientation process, you get to choose your next steps based on how your process works. All right, well, if we don't have anything else, I am going to go ahead and close this out for today, and I want to thank all of you guys for participating in this webinar. Again, it was our first one, and so it was kind of a trial for us, and we hope you found it helpful.